Hey.
One moment, I'm just downloading the PDF of the book so that way we can I can share the screen too, inshallah. I didn't even look on the Shamila. Let me see. Oh, it is here. Oh, subhanallah. MashaAllah. Mumtaz. And we'll just go ahead and do that. Mumtaz. Alhamdulillah. Let me just have this open over here. And this right over here, inshallah. All right, one moment and we'll begin. طيب. Let's go ahead and begin, inshallah ta'ala. In our last class, we were ending our talk with what Ibn al-Eid had said and what al-Birmawi had said, and we looked through the statements that were given by Az-Zarkashi in al-Bahr and others. Tamam. Today we're going to be picking up from where we left off. Tamam. And we're going to start with al-ijza. Tamam. Let me open this up here, ibnillah. Let's do it this way. Al-ijza. Damn, right here. This is where we're going to begin, inshallah ta'ala. طيب, Bismillah. He says, ويختص الإجزاء بالمطلوب من واجب ومندوب لا يتجاوزهما إلى غيرهما من عقد وغيره في الأصح. يعني the idea of ijza has to do with that which is wajib or mandub. It doesn't apply to things like that require صحة, like a contract. تمام. وقيل يختص بالواجب. قيل يختص meaning it is limited. Ijza is limited to that which is wajib. لا يجاوزه إلى غيره من المندوب وغيره. The problem with this discussion is when you get up to pray 2 rak'ah that are sunnah, all of the ulama of our madhab, for example, will tell you what? You need a niyyah, right? And your prayer is batil without that niyyah. But the prayer was sunnah to begin with. Why would you be held to the same standards? If the actual ibadah within itself wasn't an obligation, it was just something that you wanted to do, why is the acts within considered a wajib? Kalam Jameel. And that angle of looking at things has always caused usulis to argue over different elements of the scenario. So if I say you're going to pray 2 rak'ah lillah, right? Well, guess what? The mu'tamad of the Shafi'iyya is that that rak'ah does not become a thing unless you recite al-Fatiha. It's not even counting. So I'm basically telling you there's wajib inside of an actual act that from the get-go was optional on your behalf. He says, وَمَنْشَأِ الْخِلَافِ, the reason for the argument and debate. خَبَرُ ابْنُ مَاجَةَ وَغَيْرِهِ مثلا. This is not the reason of the debate. This is just one of the reasons of the debate. Is like this hadith. أَرْبَعٌ لَا تُجْزِئُ فِي الْأَضَاحِ. The Prophet ﷺ is speaking about udhiyah. Udhiyah is manduba. It's sunnah. But he said, لا يجزئ. The term ijza, it means you have not fulfilled the command upon you. Command upon you, does this mean what's wajib upon you? Or would it include that which is sunnah? He says, وَهِيَ مَنْدُوبَةٌ عِنْدَنَا وَاجِبَةٌ عِنْدَ غَيْرِنَا كَأَبِي حَنِيفَةَ. Tamam. So for them, they'll just say, oh, well, it's wajib. That's a whole classification that we have. So ijza here wouldn't be a problem. But for us, we say it's sunnah. We'll say then ijza, you fulfilling an act would be suffice. He says, وَيُقَابِلُهَا أي الصحة البطلان, that the act is batil. كلام جميل. لماذا؟ قال فهو مخالفة الفعل ذي الوجهين الشرع. An act can be technically acted out in many different ways. What they mean by this is, I tell you to pray 2 rak'ah. stand face the Qibla, recite Quran, bow, stand up, prostrate, sit up, prostrate, get up, do it again. At the end of the second one, give salam, right? How many ways could you do what I just said? Right off the back, 2 ways. One in my head and one with my body. There's 2 ways for you, right? But the one in my head is wrong, right? You might say, well, that's nonsense. It's not. You see, if I couldn't stand, sit, lay down, move any parts of my body, I would be doing it that way, right? And it would be valid, wouldn't it? Naam. All right. So acts that initially have more than one way to do them but once the command is given to you, you're expected to do it in one way only unless circumstances change for you. Doing it other than that one way would be considered batil for you. If Stephen Hawking became Muslim, مثلا, what would be batil for you to do might have been okay for him to do. Or Al-Hajj Muhammad Abdul Mu'ti, who also was in the same state as Stephen Hawking that I knew in Egypt. He didn't have a fancy computer to talk for him though. تمام. قال وقيل في العبادة عدم إسقاطها القضاء. Some of the ulama, they came and they said, batil is simply referring to an act that you were supposed to fulfill, but since you didn't do it as it was expected of you to do it, you still have yet to fulfill the command. So since you have yet to fulfill the command, right, then we're going to say that it is considered batil. But this is a problem. Utilizing that definition is a problem. Why? Because if you're a resident and the water breaks out, right, there's no water, and you make tayammum and pray. Now we already know that that does not suffice the command, right? You're still going to have to make that up once the water comes back, right? Right. But is it batil? Can I call the prayer that you just did batil? No. Even though لم تسقط عنك القضاء, you still have to do it, right? But it's not what? It's not batil. Okay, that's why that definition is problematic. He says وهو أي البطلان, كلام جميل, الفساد في الأصح. بطلان is fasad amongst the Shafi'iyya mainly. Okay, others, they differ between the two terms and utilize them differently. قال فكل منهما البطلان والفساد مخالفة أو مخالفة ما ذكر أو ما ذكر الشرع، وإن اختلف في بعض أبواب الفقه كالخلع والكتابة لاصطلاح آخر. Even though there might be variations between how we use them in these chapters, like wajib and rukn in Hajj, when we spoke about that before in the Shafi'i fiqh, right? What's khul'? Khul' is when the wife asks for a divorce by offering compensation to the husband to sign off on a divorce. Tamam. Al-khul' is the same thing as talaq in the Shafi'i school. Tamam. What is happening? Is she doing ibtal for the aqd, or is she doing fasad lil'aqd? No, it's ibtal lil'aqd. It's ibtal lil'aqd. We're trying to overturn the contract, right? The marital contract. Okay. What about in kitaba? What's kitaba? In Islam, if you have slaves and there's no work, you don't have properties to actually get them to work and help you in your affairs, you don't just keep them to keep them. Okay. If you're keeping them because they're helping you around the house, or your slave has kids, and if you just kick them out, he's not going to find work, so you keep them in your house to be with your kids and all one big happy family, that's fine. But if there's no need for them, it's highly recommended that you offer them an opportunity to go and find a job on their own, right? And pay you back whatever you spent in buying them, or however much you want. One of the most famous situations in the Muslim world has always been like a contract for a dinar kind of thing. So it's like, yeah, go do your job, and I'll let you go for $1. It's more of like, trying to do a contract between them, but the law will require some sort of compensation. It's kind of like you can only divide up your property so much between your children while you're alive in many countries. So what they'll do in Egypt will be like, a father will tell his son, give me a pound, give him an Egyptian pound, be like, okay, I sold you this building for £1. Just so that way the official documentation is appropriate and actually has a value on it. So you'll set up a contract with your slave, right? And you'll say, all right, I'm going to give you 2 years, pay me back, I don't know, $5,000 in monthly payments. And once you've paid that money up, right, you're officially free. So once the slave gets the last receipt from his master, he can go to the court, and the court will sign off on his freedom. He's no longer a slave ever again. Khalas. He bought his freedom, right? And this is when we are speaking about who we give zakah to, one of them is what al-mukatibin fi riqab, that we want Bayt al-Mal, if we've already given to the poor of the area, we want them to move on to 2 different types of individuals in our communities. Those in debt, to help them pay off their debt, right? Give them some of the zakah money. And those slaves that have a contract that they're trying to work and pay off, just try to help them by giving them the money they need to gain their freedom on their own. Not getting involved, but actually telling the slave, here's the money you need, go and suffice the contract so you can get your freedom. Kalam Jamil. That's called kitaba. Now, that kitaba can go through states of ifsad. Kalam Jamil, not butlan, but ifsad. Like, for example, the slave master comes and says, oh, I need you to work with me on the field today. That disrupts the contract, right? You're supposed to be giving him an opportunity. Now what you're doing is bringing in fasad. You're corrupting the contract. We'll call that fasad. We won't call that butlan, because the contract can be easily corrected by just simply telling the slave master, no, let the guy go and work. That was the agreement. Tamam? So fasad in certain cases does not necessarily mean butlan of the contract. It just means that we need to stop something from happening that could lead to nullifying the contract altogether. Tamam? He says, وقالت الحنفية مخالفته الشرع بأن كان منهيا عنه إن كانت لكون النهي عنه لأصله فهي البطلان كما في الصلاة الفاقدة شرطا أو ركنا. Kalam Jamil. There should be shartan right here. There's an error right there. But what the Ahnaf are saying is that if someone is doing something that the Sharia told them that in that act you cannot do this, but they're doing it anyway, like messing with a condition or a rukn, then this is butlan. Tamam. And then they said, but if it's like selling something that you cannot sell, like bay'ul malaqih, kalam jamil, then this is what fasad. قال لفقد ركن من البيع أو لوصفه فهي الفساد. بيع الملاقيح is اللهم صل على سيدنا Muhammad. It's like selling the male cow to mate with another farmer's females. تمام. قال فهي فساد كما في صوم يوم النحر للإعراض بصومه عن ضيافة الله للناس بلحوم الأضاحي التي شرعها فيه. Like fasting on the day of النحر. That's the day of eating. تمام. He says وكما في بيع الدرهم بدرهمين. That would be riba, right? لاشتماله على الزيادة فيأثم به ويفيد بالقبض ملكا خبيثا أي ضعيفا. ولو نذر صوم يوم النحر صح نذره لأن الإثم في فعله دون نذره. But what if someone comes and tries and plays around? Kalam Jamil, and does what? They do a nadhr. They take an oath to fulfill an act on a day that they shouldn't have been doing. Like, by Allah, I will fast on day X. And you weren't supposed to be doing that on day X. The nadhr would be sahih, but they would be a sinner for doing so. ويؤمر بفطره وقضائه ليتخلص عن الإثم ويفي بالنذر. So we're going to have to tell them, you're going to forcefully miss the nadhr, and therefore since nadhr makes things an obligation upon you, you'll have to make that up at a later time. ولو صامه وفى بنذره لأنه أدى الصوم كما التزمه فقد اعتد بالفاسد أما الباطل فلا يعتد به. He's saying, you see, but you could technically, right, allow somehow, right, the fasad to slip through by correcting it somehow or going around it somehow. But the batil would never. Okay? The batil would never. But at the same token, are they truly that different? According to the Shafi'iyya, aside from the chapters of khul' and kitaba, the answer is no, there is no difference really between the two, because even if you say batil, you could come up with corrections to it and you can fix it. He says وضعف ذلك, meaning the tafriqah, بأن التفرقة إن كانت شرعية فأين دليلها? If there was a true difference between fasad and butlan in the Sharia, then we must ask, where is the evidence of this? He says, rather, بل يبطلها قوله تعالى لو كان فيها أو فيهما آلهة إلا الله لفسدتا. Right? If there were other gods other than Allah, then there would be fasad. Fasad in all of existence. Fasad in all of the creation. Right? حيث سمى الله تعالى ما لم يثبت أصلا فاسدا وإن كانت عقلية فالعقل لا يحتج به في مثل ذلك. Now if you say, no, the reasoning for making a difference between fasad and butlan is aqli, meaning I used my aql to make this determination, then the aql has no place here. This is true. Why? Because this is a matter of tashri', not a matter of aqliyat. Kalam Jamil, not a matter of what? Aqliyat. Where are those who accuse us of doing taqdeem al-aqli ala al-shar'a? It's literally the opposite. قال والخلف لفظي من زيادة أي عائد إلى اللفظ والتسمية إذ حاصله أن مخالفة ما ذكر الشرع بالنهي عنه لأصله كما تسمى بطلانا هل تسمى فسادا أو لوصفه كما تسمى فسادا هل تسمى بطلانا فعندهم لا وعندنا نعم. He's saying, realistically, we can argue that the khilaf between us and the Ahnaf is merely semantics. Why? Well, because the argument realistically is on the naming, but acting upon it, يعني correcting the problem and correcting the state, you'll see and you'll notice that they're doing the same thing. Both the madhab, the Shafi'iyya and the Ahnaf, are doing the same thing. Therefore, it seems that more than likely the khilaf is lafzi only. قال والأصح أن الأداء فعل العبادة صوما أو صلاة أو غيرهما. We're speaking now about the mas'ala of ada and qada. And he's going to start with ada. Now, essentially, as a reminder, in Kitab al-Salah, we've studied and we've seen that there's no harm in intending ada or qada for a prayer you're about to pray right now. Alhamdulillah. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for example, says, فَإِذَا قَضَيْتُم مَنَاسِكَكُمْ. He's using the term qada, but he's not speaking about qada. He's speaking about ada. And this is because linguistically, meaning al-haqiqatul lughawiyya, these terms mean the same exact thing. It just means fulfillment. Now that fulfillment could be in the time that it was supposed to be, or a makeup, but still called a fulfillment. And that's what qada means. Ada is just simply an indication that you're fulfilling on time, when you were supposed to. While qada is referring to making up that which you missed. But linguistically, they're both the same. قال أو فعل ركعة من الصلاة في وقتها, right? مع فعل البقية بعده واجبة كانت أو مندوبة, without any khilaf. Okay? He says وتعبيري بالركعة هنا وبدونها في القضاء أولى من تعبيره بالبعض لما لا يخفى. He said here, when he said the term أو فعل ركعة, and then in قضاء he says دون ركعة, because if you say that you fulfilled a rak'ah in the time, then the entirety of the salah would be considered ada, not qada. It's not you making up. Why? He says وَلِخَبَرِ الصَّحِيحَيْنِ, right? مَنْ أَدْرَكَ رَكْعَةً مِنَ الصَّلَاةِ فَقَدْ أَدْرَكَ الصَّلَاةِ. If you pray a full rak'ah before the time leaves, then the entirety of the prayer is considered ada, even though the rest of it is what? Qada. And that's better than what he did in Jam' al-Jawami', because in Jam' al-Jawami' he didn't specify it that way. He says أي مؤداة وقيل الأداء فعل العبادة في وقتها ففعل بعضها فيه ولو ركعة وبعضها بعده لا يكون أداء حقيقة كما لا يكون قضاء كذلك بل يسمى بأحدهما مجازا بتبعية ما في الوقت لما بعده أو بالعكس وهذا ما عليه الأصوليون. Okay, so he's saying some, meaning the majority of the usulis, they argue that we might call the entirety of the prayer that one rak'ah was in its time, but the rest of the rak'ah, like so say, يعني, if we were to look at a clock method right now and just say that Asr comes in at 3 p.m., but you only start praying Dhuhr at 2:58. So by the time you finish the first rak'ah, the second rak'ah, it's already crossed 3 o'clock. What is this prayer? Ada or qada? The fuqaha will say this is ada automatically. Why? Because of the hadith that we just mentioned. The usulis say not realistically. It's more like that one rak'ah was ada, and technically the rest of the rak'at were qada, but we'll call them ada majazan. Kalam Jamil. He says واعتبار الركعة في الأداء دونها في القضاء كما سيأتي إنما ذكره الفقهاء وإنما ذكرته هنا تبعا للأصل والخبر المذكور قد لا يدل على ما ذكروه لاحتمال أنه في من زال عذره كجنون وقد بقي من الوقت ما يسع ركعة فيجب عليه الصلاة. He said some might argue that this is just not going to work here. Why? He says because that hadith could be limited to a certain scenario. What kind of scenario? Like the excuse being lifted, the excuse that held you back from prayer was lifted. And you only had time to do one rak'ah. So you start praying it. So because you had an excuse, it was considered ada. So somebody might argue against the usage of that hadith and saying that it belongs to a limitation. And if you, I don't know if you recall, but I had posted scenarios for hayd. Let me see if I can bring it over here. It's in. I put it into the main group. Bismillah, Bismillah. No. Where'd it go? Just want to bring it over here since it will help. Here we go. No, it's the 5 bucket. Here we go. Menses ending. Here we go. I'm just gonna put it in the chat right here, and I'll put it in the usul group as well, just so that way it can be present and up to date. So, here, I'll do this as well, so it can be on the screen for anyone who is watching. See, if menses ends before the time of subh has ended by enough time to do takbir, she has to make up subh. Kalam Jameel. Now, what if we were to take that scenario, right, and say that she actually started to pray before the time had ended? If she fulfills one rak'ah before the time exits, then the entirety of her prayer is considered ada by default. Okay? All right, now let's go back to what we were covering here. Tamam. He says, وَهُوَ أي وقت العبادة. Right there. المؤدات زمن مقدر لها شرعا. The times that are given for certain ibadah are times that the sharia itself has specified. موسعا كان, whether those times are have a wide range, right? كزمن الصلوات المكتوبة, like the time blocks of the salawat. وسننها, because the sunnah, the rawatib, right? They'll be connected to their fara'id, and therefore they'll have the same time blocks as the fara'id actually have, right? أو مضيقا, or shorter time frames and time slots, كزمن صوم رمضان, the time that you have to fast Ramadan. أو الأيام البيض, or the white days throughout the month, right? The sunnah times of fasting. فما لم يقدر له زمن شرعا كنذر ونفل مطلقين وغيرهما, but that which does not have a time slot, like a nadhr, like a nafl, and others. وإن كان فوريا كالإيمان لا يسمى فعله أداء ولا قضاء اصطلاحا. We don't refer to these open-ended acts, right? أداء or قضاء, اصطلاحا meaning in fiqh. وإن كان الزمن ضروريا لفعله, كلام جميل, ومن ذلك وقته العمر كالحج, وتسمية بعضهم لوقته موسعا مجازا. He says, and then there are things that do have a timing, but the timing is so broad it's as if it's not there. Like al-hajj. What's its time frame? Your lifespan. The entirety of your lifespan. Kalam Jamil. Now, it has a time, but we don't consider it as one of those acts that have a time limit because it's so broad. He says, لوقته موسعا, أو بعضهم يعني, some people will call it وقت موسع, that's مجاز. تمام. إذ الموسع ما يعلم المكلف آخره, because a موسع, a broad time span that you get for an ibadah, is something that a mukallaf understands when that time ends, meaning they know when it ends. We don't know when we're going to die. We don't know when we will no longer be able to do things, and therefore we don't know. وآخر العمر لا يعلمه, right? He says, فلا يسمى فعله أداء ولا قضاء اصطلاحا إن فقه, بل يسميهما مجازا أو لغة كأداء الدين وقضائه. نبه على ذلك العلامة البرماوي. And we spoke about who al-Birmawi was. Now he moves on to قضاء. He says, والأصح أن القضاء فعلها أي العبادة أو فعلها إلا دون ركعة بعد وقتها. دون ركعة meaning less than a rak'ah before the time exits. So in the previous example we said Asr starts at 3 p.m. sharp and you began to pray at 12:59 and 30 seconds. So definitely that first rak'ah won't end before the clock strikes 3, right? والفرق بين ذي الركعة وما دونها أنها تشتمل على معظم أفعال الصلاة، إذ معظم الباقي كالتكرير لها فجعل ما بعد الوقت تبعا لها. The the uniqueness of the rak'ah here and why the rak'ah itself would be a determining factor is that realistically a prayer is made up of a rak'at. The first rak'ah is a representation of what you're going to continue to do in accordance with that for that salah. So realistically, this is why we can logically understand why catching a full rak'ah within the time slot would make everything that follows, even if it falls outside the time slot, as part of the first, meaning ada, because you're repeating the first. Tamam? He says, بخلاف ما دونها وقيل القضاء فعل العبادة أو بعضها ولو دون ركعة بعد وقتها. Now, some have argued no, that qada, kalam jamil, just simply means any part of the ibadah falling outside of the time of that ibadah. He says, وَبَعْضُ الْفُقَهَاء حَقَّقَ فَسَمَّى مَا فِي الْوَقْتِ أَدَاء وَمَا بَعْدَهُ قَضَاء. Some of the fuqaha argued that the way that we should look at this is that that which has fallen into the time is ada, and that which has fallen outside the time is qada. كلام جميل. Why? تداركا بذلك الفعل لما سبق لفعله, because they are making up what they should have done in وقت الأداء, so therefore it would be قضاء. He says مقتد وجوبا أو ندبا سواء أكان المقتضي من المتدارك كما في قضاء الصلاة المتروكة بلا عذر أم من غيره كما في قضاء النائم الصلاة والحائض الصوم، فإن سبق لفعلهما مقتض من غير النائم والحائض لا منهما، وإن انعقد سبب الوجوب أو الندب في حقهما وخرج بالتدارك إعادة الصلاة المؤداة في الوقت بعده. Saying that those fuqaha that argue this, what they're saying or what they're seeing is that whether this was wujub or sunnah, whether they had an excuse or not, whether they fell asleep or she was in menses and now she's making up her fast, all of this would be irrelevant. The bottom line is what is not completed in its time for some of the fuqaha is not considered ada. And anything outside of its time, regardless, even if there was an excuse or not, would be called qada. End of story for them. Kalam Jamil. Now he's going to move on to the mas'ala of what i'ada is. Now the mu'tamad, just so you know, is usually what he states first. So when he said وَالْأَصَحُ أَنَّ الْقَضَاءَ فِعْلُهَا أي العبادة أو فعلها إلا دون ركعة بعد وقتها, that is the mu'tamad of the Shafi'i school. What does this mean? This means in the scenario we gave before, if the person prayed a full rak'ah from the salah in its time and the rest outside time, that would be what? Ada. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever catches a rak'ah in the time, then they have catched the prayer. Tamam? That is the mu'tamad. All the other opinions that he mentions, it can be other Shafi'is, right? Or other schools altogether like the Hanafis, but mostly the Hanafis. As you know, as many people know and understand, that the true impact in the Muslim world, the true full powerful schools of fiqh and usul and hadith in the Muslim world has always been the Shafi'is and the Hanafis. Tamam. I know Malikis might not like hearing that, but it's just the reality. They follow in the footsteps of the Shafi'i usulis, and in hadith they follow the Shafi'i muhaddithin. Kalam Jameel. At times they might mention like a unique Maliki opinion, a unique Hanbali opinion, but for the most part, the main factors are Shafi'is and Hanafis. Tamam. What about Hanbalis? They haven't really ever been like a global, overall Muslim world impact. And for the Malikiyya, it has been a very pro-Western ideology for centuries. What do I mean by pro-Western? Meaning it's easier to be Maliki and connected to the Western world than it is anything else, because of different concepts and principles such as istihala. If you cook with wine, that's fine because there's no more wine in it, right? If you use swine gelatine in jello, well, you're not eating swine, are you? No. It's a chemical. Regardless of where it's extracted from, now it's called jello. Having dogs is okay. Again, more of a Western cultural thing, right? So they've found it's always found an easy home in the western parts of the Muslim world that are more connected with Europe than anything else. They used to have a whole branch in Iraq. كلام جميل. Well, they hate it, yes, but based upon the principles of their school, that would be okay. Vanilla extract would be okay because of their rules of istihala. كلام جميل. Yeah, there might be karaha, sure, but there's if you're at a supermarket buying and on it it's strawberry jello, it doesn't matter if it says and in the ingredients is swine. They're not concerned with that initially. It's not that they're seeking things out, it's just that they're a lot more lenient in the overall approach. Tamam? That's kind of your core difference between us. And that's why they've always found it easier in, even in Europe, in Spain, it was easier to be Maliki there. In Morocco, they're very heavily influenced by Southern and Western Europe. Very easy there, right? If you look at their cuisine, that will speak volumes. Kalam Jamil. They're into a lot of odd things. Tamam. Only in Morocco. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Anyway, so we normally won't mention their khilaf that much because it's very, very minor. Kalam Jamil. Same thing with the Hanbalis. Their khilaf is very, very minor. But overall, as I said, it's always between Shafi'is and Hanafis have been most of the major contention, balancing each other out, and discussions. Yeah, you can actually Google some of their dishes. Some of them are just weird. Kalam Jamil. But as I said, it's all in accordance with their madhab. Tamam. Whether it's stuffed squid and they have some interesting things. I mean, nothing that I would try personally, but Allah al-musta'an. We'll just leave it there for now. He says, والأصح أن الإعادة فعلها أي العبادة وقتها ثانيا مطلقا. نعم. إعادة means you're repeating the act. Now, this does not necessitate that the initial fulfillment of the act that had something wrong with it. No. It's you are repeating. There could be 100 of reasons why. When you did it the first time, there was no jama'ah. Now there is a jama'ah. This would be an i'ada. It's in its time still. أي سواء كان لعذر من خلل في فعلها أولا. Maybe he thought he did something off the first time around. أو حصول فضيلة لم تكن في فعلها أولا. Or he could have dressed better and he felt like he wasn't dressed appropriately for the prayer, so he wants to do it over again. ككون الإمام أعلم وأورع. The imam that was present, right? The regular imam, the one that follows the rules on the sunnah, right? He wasn't there, he came in late. And there was another guy, and he's known to have just weird ideologies, and you're like, all right, well, you know something? I don't want to pray behind this person. Not that the prayer will be bolted or anything like that. It's just, I'd rather pray behind this other guy, but he never showed up. So you prayed the jama'ah, and then after you were done, the imam came, the normal imam, apologizing to everyone that he was late. Kalam Jamil. So in that case, that would be an i'ada. أو الجمع أكثر. It was only you and one person, but now 50 people came in. That'd be a better, higher reward. I mean, you already have the reward, but a bigger one would, inshallah ta'ala, could constitute better reward. أو المكان أشرف. You hopped on a bus, you were in Mecca, and before you had prayed the prayer, right, in another masjid, but now you're at the haram. And you're like, oh, well, let me go ahead and repeat the prayer. I'm at the haram. The salah here is multiplied, right? Those will be different reasons for i'ada. There might be many more. These are just examples. أو لغير عذر ظاهر بأن استوت الجماعتان. Or really there's no true reason that you would repeat it. You just felt like doing it. أو زادت الأولى بفضيلة. One of them was better than the other one. Allahu a'lam. Like, يعني you were leaving and people came in late for Dhuhr and they were like, can you please pray with us so we can have jama'ah? The first one already counted. The second one, even though it's an i'ada, does it even count? Or is it nafl? Or is the first one nafl and this one sunnah? He says, وقيل الإعادة مختصة بخلل في الأول وعليه الأكثر. The majority, kalam jamil, will argue that i'ada should only be a thing, should only be accepted if there was a problem in the first one. And that's what the majority of usulis and fuqaha say. He said, وَقِيل بِالْعُذْرِ الشَّامِلِ لِلْخَلَلِ. There, يعني, just means that there's an assumption of خلل. لحصول ولحصول فضيلة لم تكن في الأول. And others said, we would include in that there was a greater benefit in the repeating that was not present in the first one. He says, وقيل لا عفوا he says وذكروا أو ذكر الأول من زيادة وهو ما اختاره الأصل في شرح المختصر. يعني the first opinion that he mentioned والأصح أن الإعادة فعلها, the one that we began reading when we said إعادة, he said this is what he said in شرح المختصر. And that means Taj al-Din al-Subki in شرح of his مختصر of Ibn al-Hajib, the Maliki scholar who wrote a small mukhtasar on usul fiqh. As-Subki explains it. He says, ويمكن حمل أول كلامه هنا عليه كما بينته في الحاشية. He's saying, and everything really that As-Subki said can يعني still be understood with that same one, kalam jamil, like he's explained in the Hashiyah. He means his Hashiyah, Shaykh al-Islam Zakaria al-Ansari's Hashiyah on Al-Imam al-Mahalli's explanation of Jam' al-Jawami'. It's a beautiful Hashiyah. قال وبما ذكر علم تعريف المؤدي والمقضى والمعاد. Now we understand the definitions of what is a fulfillment, what is making up, and what is a repeat of an act. بأن يقال على الأصح المؤدى مثلا ما فعل مما مر في الأداء في وقته. That we can say, for example, that a fulfillment is fulfilling the act within the time that you were supposed to. وقس به الآخرين وأن الإعادة قسم من الأداء. Repeating is a subcategory of fulfillment. فهي أخص منه وعليه الأكثر. كلام جميل. And it is part of fulfillment because it has to do with the timing of fulfilling the act. وقيل قسيم له وعليه مشى البيضاوي حيث قال العبادة إن وقعت في وقتها المعين ولم تسبق بأداء مختل فأداء وإلا فإعادة. Al-Baydawi, when he defined it, he said إعادة is an additional component of ada. Okay, it's not a repeat of fulfillment, it's not a repeat of the ada, but it's like a correction that you can do if the ada had a problem. كلام جميل. قال لكن كلامه في المرصاد يخالفه وقد ذكرته في الحاشية مع زيادة. نعم. He's saying, but to say it's a component is not necessarily what everyone else is arguing for. So there's a problem there. And when he spoke on this in his book Al-Mirsad, he negated himself of what he said in his Mukhtasar in Minhaj al-Usul by Imam al-Baydawi. He says, and I commented on all of that in the Hashiyah on Jam' al-Jawami'. We're going to stop here bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Kalam Jameel. This is where we ended. In our next class, we're going to be taking Ar-Rukhsah. That's this segment right here, inshallah ta'ala. I'll see everyone in our next classes بإذن next week. وأقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله تعالى لي ولكم فاستغفروا إنه هو الغفور الرحيم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.